Hello and welcome to 5 Lessons Scientists Can Learn from Entrepreneurs. This is a part of the short video series from Transcend's Professional Development Core. So, quick disclaimer, I am not an entrepreneur, I am a scientist. But I've actually had a little bit of entrepreneurial training. I've gone through the NSF I-Course Hub, the Great Plains Edition. So I've got some experience with that, and I've also read some books about um, starting, running businesses. So I'm by no means an expert, but I am a scientist who's interested in this. So some of the things that I've learned might help other scientists. So, what are the lessons that I think scientists could learn from entrepreneurs? Well, there are 5 new ways to serve, appetite for risk, be able to touch reality, the benefits of solo versus team, and then picturing the finale. So let's go into each. First up, we have service. So the lesson is you want to begin with new ideas on how you can serve others. The whole thing with an entrepreneur is, they are going to provide a good or a service, and they need to be able to do that well. And as a scientist, there are 2 kind of basic types of research, or 2 forms of research: basic and applied. So basic is more for its own sake, without necessarily having some sort of application. And applied is more like, what use can we get out of this? Biomedical research is very much applied, whereas some forms of biology are more basic. And so it's probably good to have a balance of both. But when we're thinking about that, we probably want to lean as scientists more heavily on the applied version. Like, how can we actually get this out into the world? How can we serve others with our science? Because ultimately, when it comes to science, you typically need to get funded. And to get funded, you probably want to answer the question, why should anyone care? And why anyone should care probably leans more onto the applied side of things. Just like any entrepreneur who wants to start a business, get money from investors, they need to provide a good or service that people care about. And so scientists should think about how their science fits in with what people care about. And ultimately, at the end of the day, most science is funded through whether you're a university or a government lab, it's funded through government grants, which are ultimately funded from taxpayers. So you're ultimately, as a scientist, responsible to the public, and so your ideas should be able to serve others in some way, even if it is very basic on the idea of understanding our world, and bringing appreciation to that. That should still kind of have a component of why should anyone care. Second lesson I think scientists could learn from entrepreneurs deals with risk. You should be able to have an appetite for risk, but also know when to stop. There's certainly a time and a place in science for sort of incremental research, building slowly on the top of what's already known and going bit by bit. But really transformative science is really taking a leap. Just like a real entrepreneur takes a leap. There's a lot of risk involved. If they didn't want a lot of risk, they could, work for a company. But if they want to start their own company, they really have to take that leap to have an appetite for risk. And not everyone has an appetite. That's okay. But some people need to. Otherwise, we never have new companies, new businesses. And I think with scientists, it's easy to sort of get sort of averse to risk. I think scientists could be a little more sort of risk positive. But on the same time of things, sometimes risks don't pay out. As an entrepreneur, you might need to know when to fold a business or try something different, pivot totally. I think as scientists, we need to realize when we have sunk costs, when research avenues aren't really working out, to be able to say, okay, nope, we've gone far enough. Let's try something new. Let's instead of sinking more time and effort into something that's not going to work out, realize we have sunk costs and to move on. All right, third lesson I think scientists could learn is being on good terms with reality. Entrepreneurs, who start businesses, launch products, it has to work in the real world. Any great idea on paper needs to survive reality. And I think with scientists, it's very easy to sort of get stuck in the world of theory and not let our ideas get out into the real world to actually practice things in reality. I think scientists could use more of that, especially with like grants, grant proposals. It's very easy to have this idea and then have a lot of sort of rose-colored glass hand waving of how you'd actually, you know, do it. But I think that's really a mistake. I think scientists, when we're thinking of projects, we really need to drill down to like how this works in reality, not hand waving about how this is going to be impactful in very vague ways, but be very concrete of like how you're actually going to do it, steps A, B, C, D, in as much detail as you can before you actually get the grant out there, get funded, like not figure it out after the fact. Have it as figure it out as much as you can beforehand. And part of that is really going out into reality, getting out of the lab and to see how it would work in practice. Something that I really learned that was really helpful when I did I-Core is I actually had to interview people to get on the phone, meet in person, and then actually talk with people. And that's what good entrepreneurs will do. They'll have like a very detailed business, plan, business canvas, whatever. And then we'll have to talk to a lot of people to make sure their ideas won't sort of crumble upon reality. And especially as scientists, I think we should really use as much data backing as we can, do preliminary analyses, get power analysis to know how many samples we actually need, and even doing some trial runs before we do a bigger project. Really making sure our science is as attached to reality as possible. All right, fourth lesson that scientists could learn from entrepreneurs is to learn how to work all the roles, in a project, but be ready to bring on partners. So a lot of entrepreneurs, they have to do everything from the beginning. They have to launch the business. They have to do the paperwork. They have to, talk to customers. They have to do everything themselves. Now, that usually doesn't last. I mean, otherwise they get burned out or their business fails. They eventually have to bring on more people or they have a partner. But I think it's a really helpful thing to realize they have to realize the ins and outs of every part of their business, every part of their product. And I think scientists could learn through that. Three key areas I think that example areas that science could deal with are statistics, sort of writing, and budgeting. Now, this is not to say that scientists should never, collaborate or never have someone help them with their things, but I think they should at least know their way around all these three different areas to some degree, whether or not they get more advanced help beyond their skill set. So first of all, statistics. If you're a scientist and you're not dealing with your own data, at least on the basic visualization, the basic statistics, you probably don't understand your data. And now there's nothing wrong with having a biostatistician come in and help you and do the more advanced stuff, but you should be able to know the basic stats, t-test, ANOVA, summarization, a basic graphing, maybe basic regression, so you understand your data and it's not fooling you or you're not fooling yourself. Second, writing. Definitely be able to write a grant, write a paper. Doesn't mean you have to do it all yourself all the time, but at least know your way around how each of these parts go together and how to actually do it yourself to some degree. And then finally, budgeting, this especially with grants. Now, again, you don't need to be an expert at budgeting, but you should be able to put together a basic budget and get help. Go from there. You shouldn't go to like a budget office or a collaborator and say, write it for me. You should have like the basics down of like, I think this is how much everything will cost. Can you maybe help me through the fine tuned details or the more complicated stuff, but at least have a solid foundation of how you actually budget and pay for stuff for science. And then the fifth one, what I call finale, is work with the finale or the end in mind. Entrepreneurs, they need to be able to plan out of like how this will actually work. What does an end state look like? What does success look like? I think sometimes with scientists, we have these ideas and it's hard to sort of get to the end of things. So I think it's really important, especially with grants, with funding, is really work on things like milestones. Like, well, how is year one going to go? How is year two going to go? Like, what does success look like? What are check marks along the way to the end goal that we know we're on the right path? Another thing, working with finale in mind, is you need to know sort of what obstacles, what could totally derail things. You should really understand your limitations or potential problems and be able to address them ahead of time as much as you can instead of just sort of blithely going along and crashing into them. And then finally, I think it's really important to understand that there's perils of both success and failure. Now, obviously, the most basic failure would be you don't get a grant or you don't get funded. Okay, that's disappointing. But actually, success can be a problem as well. I know, I think one of the sneaky things about business success, entrepreneurial success, is actually you can fail when you succeed because, like, say your product, your company takes off and explodes, and then suddenly you can't meet demand, you can't hire enough people. You can actually fail because you weren't ready for success. You were successful too fast and it gets derailed. I think for scientists that's an important thing too. Like, maybe you have this pie in the sky grant and it actually gets funded, but then suddenly you realize you didn't plan for it. You didn't plan to get this very ambitious thing done in a couple years, and you actually aren't able to complete the grant, and then that sort of tanks your future career because you did plan something you could actually get done. So I think it's really important to work with the finale in mind. All right, with that, I think those are 5 lessons that from the sort of the entrepreneurial space that scientists could really learn from. Hopefully that was helpful for you, and yeah, have a great entrepreneurial scientific day.